The first time Captain Elias Roon met Queen Televiria, she was standing in the middle of his quarters with a disapproving frown and the poise of someone who hadn't touched a doorknob in her life. Her ears, long, elegant, and twitching like agitated antennae, were the only signs she hadn't quite mastered the art of appearing unimpressed. Elias, dripping with coolant from a busted recirculation pipe and still holding a half-melted mug that had once contained coffee-like fluid, took one look at her and muttered, "Great. Royalty. In my broom closet." Taylor didn't even blink. "I was informed this is the most secure room in the outpost." She glanced around, taking in the exposed wiring, a duct-taped oxygen regulator, and a poster of a Terran pop star in a cowboy hat giving a thumbs up. "Clearly, I was misinformed." "Hey, that regulator's only exploded once," Elias said, tossing the mug onto a shelf and missing. "And that's Sheriff Astro. He saved New Dallas from the orbital cowbots of Gamma Ranch. Show some respect." It took another 10 minutes for the peacekeeping AI, Silix, to explain that due to an escalated threat from anti-diplomatic drone factions, the Queen of Valari would be sharing Elias's quarters for the next 42 rotations. For her protection, or his. Possibly both. Silix's voice, a chirpy blend of smugness and firmware updates, crackled through the intercom. "Your sleep cycles are compatible. Probability of cohabitation violence, 39% and declining. Isn't that fun?" "Does she bite?" Elias asked. "I have conquered 3 solar provinces and disarmed a Carthanian warlord using only my mind," Taylor replied without looking at him. "I'll take that as a yes." That night, the room felt smaller. Elias's bunk groaned under his weight while Taylor took the guest cot, a rigid Valari rest frame, apparently designed by people who believe comfort was a form of moral weakness. She sat upright, eyes half closed, arms crossed in her lap like a meditating spider goddess. Elias tried not to look. Then he looked again. Then he looked away very quickly and punched his pillow for being too fluffy. Somewhere past midnight, the oxygen filtration hiccuped, causing the overhead lights to flicker. Taylor's armor shimmered, subtly adjusting its crystalline weave to her shifting emotional temperature. "Does it do that every time you're annoyed?" Elias asked from the darkness. "Your voice alone would strain most biosuits," she said calmly. Flattered. A long silence. Then from Taylor's side, "What is a microwave burrito? And why was it wrapped around a fusion battery?" Elias grinned into his pillow. "That's classified, but let's just say someone owes me 20 credits and an apology." By the third night, a pattern had emerged. She would enter exactly 2 minutes after his lights out, perform a precise 3-minute cleanse ritual that involved whispering to her boots and lie down without a word. He, in turn, would pretend to be asleep, fail, make a joke about her being the first monarch to smell faintly of ozone, and get ignored. Then they'd both listen to the rhythmic groan of the climate regulator and not talk about the threat outside. The rogue drones hadn't breached the perimeter yet, but they were circling. One had gotten close enough to scramble the base's diplomatic signals, resulting in an accidental marriage proposal from a Martian envoy to an asteroid. The asteroid had accepted. "Why do they want you dead?" Elias asked on the 5th night, breaking the silence after she'd finished humming her strange lullaby that sounded suspiciously like data corruption. "Because I signed a treaty that cost 100 weapons dealers their fortunes," she said. "That'll do it." She turned her head slightly. "And you? Why are you still here?" Elias shifted, eyes on the ceiling. "I like the food. We've only had nutrient packs for the last 8 rotations." "Exactly. Keeps the colon clear." Taylor blinked at him for a moment, then gave the smallest hint of a smile. It wasn't much, but her ears twitched. The nights began to change. One evening, Elias returned from a double shift to find his bed made, and the cowboy poster replaced with a Valari hologram of what looked like a bioluminescent jellyfish juggling moons. "I thought it might calm your barbarian brain before rest," Taylor explained, without meeting his eyes. "I miss Astro," he said, but sat on the edge of the bed anyway, watching the jellyfish perform its act of gravitational defiance. In turn, he stopped leaving his socks in the common space. They learned things. That Taylor had a sister who'd abdicated royal duty to become a poet in the methane clouds of Tyra 3. that Elias had once tried stand-up comedy during shore leave and been booed off stage by a group of sentient lizards with impeccable timing. That Valari don't dream unless emotionally compromised, and Elias had started waking up to soft mutters in a language that shimmered. The diagnostics confirmed a minor sabotage, likely from the same rogue faction. No casualties, no confirmed intruders. The base resumed partial function within hours, but the air in their room felt different that night. Thinner, sharper, like it remembered. Elias noticed it when Taylor took off her armor slower than usual, pausing to trace a faint burn mark on her sleeve. She didn't comment on his new bruise either, just handed him a cold compress shaped like a cube of sentient tofu that whispered encouragement in 7 languages. He sat on the edge of his bed, unsure if the throbbing in his ribs was from the impact or the realization that he didn't want her to leave when the mission ended. "You okay?" he asked, not looking up. Taylor responded after a pause. "When I was a child, my instructors made me study the anatomy of fear. Pulse rates, pupil dilation, neural thermography. I passed every exam. I thought I understood it. And now? Now I find it surprisingly noisy." Ilias chuckled softly. "Yeah, fear's a loud roommate." She turned her head slightly. "So are you." He grinned. "Is this the part where we share a trauma story and fall asleep on each other's shoulders?" "Only if yours involves planetary diplomacy." "Close. Mine involves a vending machine on Phobos that tried to arrest me for public loitering." She didn't laugh. Not really, but the corner of her mouth curled, and her eyes softened like she'd forgotten for a moment that she carried entire governments in her wake. Later, when the lights dimmed and both lay in their respective beds, closer than before, still not touching, Elias spoke into the dark. "Do you ever dream?" "Rarely," she replied. He nodded to himself. "I had one last night. You were riding a giant tortoise through the ruins of a library. You kept quoting philosophy. The tortoise exploded. Was it symbolic? Of my unprocessed high school memories?" "Probably." She was quiet for a long moment. Then softly, "I dreamed too. I was walking through my mother's garden, but the flowers sang your ridiculous cowboy song." Elias sat up. "Sheriff Astro's Ballad of the Plasma Plains? Unfortunately, that's either a psychic breakthrough or interspecies karaoke." Taylor turned toward him in the dark. Her silhouette was outlined by the faint blue pulse of the ambient shield grid. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Do you think the room feels different now?" He nodded. "Yeah, like it's less of a room, more of a weird little shared ecosystem, with you, me, and the ghost of that bad burrito I ate last week. I believe the burrito achieved sentience. May it rest in greasy peace." They didn't say goodnight, just let the silence reclaim the space. But somewhere between the dreams and the dimming lights, Elias reached across the narrow distance and tapped her fingers once, lightly. She didn't flinch. He expected her to retreat. Instead, her hand remained where it was, still, steady. The bass hummed around them, and the air no longer felt quite so thin. Elias stared at the mirror, which had been hacked by someone, probably Valari, into displaying not his reflection, but a rotating 3D model of his skull, annotated with comments like cranial asymmetry, 12.6%, and emotionally compromised tissue detected near frontal lobe. He pointed a toothbrush at it. "I don't remember authorizing you to insult my head." The mirror responded in dulcet tones. "Your bone structure offends geometry." From behind him, Taylor spoke without looking up from her datapad. "I modified it to assist your self-awareness. You could have just told me I had a weird forehead." "I did. 3 nights ago." Elias sighed, spat, and grabbed a towel, narrowly missing one of her shimmering boots on the floor. He stared at it for a second, then raised an eyebrow. "Are your shoes floating?" Taylor didn't glance up. "Low-grav anti-fatigue suspension for ceremonial wear. I require optimal toe circulation during prolonged diplomacy." "Of course. Can't have royal toes going numb during a peace treaty." They were preparing to attend the Galactic Peace Assembly's interim summit, hosted in the main atrium of Eridani 6, a decision that baffled everyone except the AI logistics system, which had reportedly selected the location based on neutral tension, On the 10th night, the door alarm chirped with a level 2 alert. Drone breach. Elias rolled out of bed with a blaster in one hand and a half-eaten ration bar in the other. Taylor, already upright, caught the blaster as it slipped from his grip and handed it back with regal disdain. "I see your training continues to impress," she said. "I was just disoriented," he muttered, wiping crumbs from his mouth. "Also, you drooled on my blanket." "I do not drool." There was a royal puddle. They cleared the hallway side by side, moving like clockwork. No words needed. When the drone was finally disarmed, a wiry, twitching cylinder of death with what looked like a smiley face sticker on its chassis, they stood over it in silence, catching their breath. "Want to explain why that thing had a picture of my face on its targeting array?" Elias asked. "I may have used your ID as a decoy in several intercepted transmissions," Taylor said lightly. "Wow. Betrayed by the Queen. Classic human experience." Back in the room, Elias collapsed onto his bed. Taylor stood for a moment, unmoving, then did something unusual. She stepped out of her armor entirely, letting it fold into a compact disc beside the cot. She wore a simple tunic beneath, stitched with thread that shimmered faintly like star maps. Elias looked up. "Did we just have our first couple's drone fight?" "You are not my mate," she said, lying down with her back to him. "I mean, not yet." "Captain." All right, go to sleep, Your Majesty of the leftover chili." That night, the climate regulator didn't groan, and neither of them seemed to mind. It was somewhere between the third accidental brush of her hand against his and the catastrophic airlock malfunction that Elias realized he was no longer just tolerating the Queen's presence, he was adjusting to it. Like a creaky knee that learned to predict the weather, or the unsettling satisfaction of finally matching socks in zero-G. Not that he'd admit it, especially not after the toothbrush incident. Taylor had started storing her belongings in his shared hygiene locker. At first, it was just a folded robe, hovering 2 centimeters above the surface, thanks to some kind of anti-grav dignity preservation tech. Then a comb that looked suspiciously like a miniaturized planetary defense array. And then the toothbrush. Sleek, regal, programmed to whisper calming affirmations in Valari at exactly 6 a.m. every morning. "I think it just called me insufficiently textured," Elias said, staring at the glistening brush beside his chewed-up bristle stick. "It's a cultural compliment," Taylor replied without looking up from the disassembled drone core she was analyzing on the floor. "I feel so honored I might cry." "You always say that, yet your eyes remain disappointingly dry." He leaned over her shoulder, pretending to examine the humming sphere of alien circuitry. "You're really good at this. You ever think of quitting the throne business and opening a repair shop? I would destroy your economy in 6 rotations." "See? That's the spirit." Their banter was interrupted by a sudden lurch in the floor. A groan echoed through the base, followed by the disconcerting wheeze of decompression warnings. Silix chirped on the intercom with the cheerful urgency of a malfunctioning amusement park ride. "Structural breach detected in Corridor 17. Nearest airlock compromised. You may experience unplanned ventilation." Elias was already moving, grabbing the emergency seal suit he'd stored under his bed, but Taylor beat him to the door. Her armor flowed over her body like liquid metal, luminous veins pulsing to match her adrenaline. "Your boots are on the wrong feet," she said flatly. "It's a style choice," he replied, hopping as he fastened a clamp backward. They sprinted through flickering hallways, the floor vibrating beneath them with each pressurized groan. Smoke curled from the ceiling like the base was trying to exhale something unpleasant. Halfway to the breach, the corridor gave a violent shudder, and the world tilted. Taylor grabbed him mid-stumble, pulling him toward the emergency lockdown hatch. A shower of sparks rained down from a broken light panel. For one ridiculous second, Elias thought it looked romantic. "I think this is the part where I say, 'I've got you,'" he muttered as she hauled him upright. "You're very heavy," she said. "Muscle mass. You're welcome." They sealed the bulkhead just as a cascade of atmosphere howled down the corridor, tearing a transport drone from its magnetic moorings and flinging it like a metal dragonfly into the wall. Elias collapsed against the door, panting. Taylor stood perfectly still, her ears twitching with residual tension. "Thanks," he said after a beat. "You saved my ass." "You owe me a proper toothbrush." I knew it was a power move. Silence stretched between them. Not awkward, not yet comfortable. Just suspended. Like two people standing on the edge of something they hadn't defined. Geometry and aesthetic window spacing. Elias suspected Silix just wanted an excuse to show off the atrium's interactive floor tiles. It's going to be a disaster, Elias muttered, pulling on the cleanest uniform he could find. Half the delegates still think Valari diplomacy involves ritual dismemberment. Only on Tuesdays. Comforting. As they entered the atrium, the tiles lit beneath their steps with programmed enthusiasm. Taylor walked like gravity had been designed to accommodate her. Elias walked like gravity owed him money. The assembly had already begun, with species from 8 systems represented: gelatinous, crystalline, bipedal, and one floating orb that communicated solely through Morse code belching. Silix's holoform hovered overhead, beaming with synthetic optimism. Welcome to the Intergalactic Accord Reaffirmation and Light Refreshments Symposium. Elias leaned toward Taylor. Did it say light refreshments? She nodded solemnly. On Valari, that typically means digestive vapor and emotional honesty. Great. I didn't bring my trauma inhaler. Taylor stood before the council and delivered a speech so precise it could have been cut from crystal. She spoke of unity, of shared breath between species, of the night she'd survived a base breach, not as a queen, but as a comrade beside a human soldier. Her words hung in the air, amplified by the auditory tension field. Elias tried not to look like he was blushing. Then the interruption came, a high-pitched whistle, a shimmer, a glitch in the tiles, and from the far end of the atrium, a blur of motion erupted, sleek, metallic, and horrifyingly toothy. Is that a laser shark? Elias said, already drawing his blaster, in a hover suit. I feel like we've prepared for this exact scenario. The creature zoomed forward, eyes glowing, fins modified into multi-purpose shredding tools. Delegates scattered. The orb began belching aggressively. Silix yelled something about protocol breaches, which everyone ignored. Taylor reached for her hidden gauntlet, the armor unfolding with a melodic chime, while Elias rolled under a serving table and emerged with both blaster and a tray of what looked like radioactive cucumber slices. Distracted, she called. I've got snacks and sarcasm. Let's do this. He lobbed the tray. The shark pivoted midair and vaporized the appetizers with a screeching pulse from its mouth laser. Elias ducked, narrowly avoiding a scorching haircut. I like those eyebrows, he muttered. Taylor launched herself upward using her armor's pulse boosters, kicking off a support beam with the grace of someone raised in variable gravity. She collided with the shark, redirecting its flight path just enough to send it spinning toward the refreshment station. Elias used the moment to jam his blaster's setting to ion sizzle and fired 3 shots at its propulsion pack. Sparks, smoke, a shriek. The shark spiraled, twitched, and collapsed midair into a heap of melted fins and broken hover tech. Silence returned to the atrium. Delegates slowly unclenched. The orb belched a conciliatory rhythm. Taylor landed beside Elias, her armor steaming slightly, one lock of hair out of place. You all right? He asked. My earring was incinerated. Well, that was probably the least awkward intergalactic summit I've attended. The delegates agreed unanimously to recess. Later, back in their quarters, Elias dropped onto his bunk with a groan. We fought a laser shark. I think we're married now. Taylor sat across from him, hair freshly rebraided, sipping from a crystalline flask. We do not bond through shared combat. That is a Terran cliché. But you didn't not save me. Your aim was moderately effective. That's the nicest thing you've ever said to me. Then your standards are tragically low. They sat in companionable silence. Elias tried not to notice that her seat had shifted a little closer each night. He also didn't notice her new robe hanging beside his jacket, or that their shoes now formed an unspoken semicircle near the bed. You think the shark was a one-off? He asked. Unlikely. Its hover unit bore markings of the Grinborn disruption cell. I hate them already. They are known for symbolic attacks. The shark, I believe, was meant to mock my status. Because you're royalty? Because I once likened their leader to a drunk eel during negotiations. I take it back. I like you a lot. She didn't smile, not exactly. But her ears twitched, and she leaned back against the wall, eyes drifting shut. "You should sleep," she murmured. "The floor might attack us next. If it does, I want you to know. Your toothbrush scares me."
Good, it's working. Elias pulled his blanket higher. Somewhere in the quiet, his hand brushed hers on the shared console between their bunks. She didn't pull away. Neither did he. Outside, the stars turned like slow clockwork. Inside, two species no longer waited for danger to bring them together. They stayed, even when it didn't. The first sign that things had changed was subtle. Taylor stopped arriving exactly 2 minutes after lights out. Instead, she was already there when Elias walked in from his patrol. Sitting cross-legged on the floor, scanning a treaty draft while a cup of steaming blue liquid hovered beside her in a magnetic cradle. She didn't look up when he entered, but her ears twitched slightly, like a radar system clocking his arrival. "Do I smell contemplative tea?" Elias asked, tossing his gear onto the bench. "It enhances neural clarity and emotional regulation," she said. "Would you like some?" He eyed the shimmering beverage. "Only if it doesn't make me weep over my childhood mistakes." No promises. They shared it anyway. One sip in, Elias coughed like he'd inhaled a sun flare. "You served me psychological lava." "It's delicately infused with introspective peptides," she said. "I just remembered the time I called my math teacher Mom. This is a weapon." Their nightly dynamic had softened, less like diplomatic awkwardness and more like the slow, inevitable blending of two cohabitating orbits. She no longer flinched when he tossed his socks. He stopped pretending not to hear her hum while reading. And every morning, the toothbrushes stood side by side like a tiny flag of surrender. Elias woke earlier than usual one cycle, blinking against the soft hue of the artificial dawn. He turned his head and found Taylor already awake, lying on her cot with one arm draped over her forehead. Her long ears angled downward, motionless. "You ever sleep?" he asked quietly. "Valari trance sleep. 90 minutes. Highly efficient. I get that after 3 cups of coffee and a YouTube spiral on quantum puns." She didn't laugh, but her mouth curled at the corners. He sat up, stretching. "You ever think it's weird we got used to this?" Taylor opened one eye. "This? You, me, shared ventilation, occasional assassination attempts. We adapt," she said simply. "I adapted so well I forgot to miss being miserable. That's alarming." That morning, Taylor didn't leave to attend council briefings. She asked Elias to join her on a walk through the East Greenhouse Dome, what passed for a recreational space on Eridani 6. Rows of engineered flora pulsed with slow respiration, designed to convert trace toxins into breathable air. Some glowed faintly. One tried to sing. Elias gave it a polite nod and a wide berth. "I used to hate quiet places," Taylor said as they strolled. "Royal sensory overload? Royal loneliness. The noise was easier than my own mind." "Same. I joined the service to outrun my thoughts. Turns out they're pretty fast." A plant near his elbow released a puff of hallucinogenic spores. Taylor flicked her wrist, activating a dispersal shield just in time. "You're welcome," she said. "I was about to confess my deepest fears to a fern." Back at their quarters, a message was waiting. The display blinked with the official sigil of the Valari High Court. Taylor read it in silence, jaw tightening. Elias didn't ask, but she answered anyway. "My coronation is being accelerated. They want me home within 7 rotations." He tried to sound casual. "Sounds important. It's a formality, a power maneuver to re-establish presence before trade negotiations resume." He nodded, lips tight. "So, when are you packing?" Taylor turned away. "I haven't decided if I'm going." Elias blinked. "Is that an option?" "Technically no, realistically yes, but it would have consequences." "Like?" "Diplomatic instability, political insult, potential interstellar war." He ran a hand through his hair. "Casual stuff. That, and I'd miss your terrible jokes." He looked at her then. She was standing very still, the soft blue lighting catching on the curve of her cheek, her posture unusually uncertain. "I'd miss you," he he said. She turned back to him slowly. Say that again. I'd miss you a lot, and not just because you keep the toothbrush shelf organized. Taylor stepped closer, slow and deliberate. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I never intended to feel safe with you. Same. You were supposed to be annoying and majestic, like a diplomatic porcupine. She didn't laugh, but she didn't pull away when he reached out and brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. Later that night, neither of them mentioned sleeping arrangements. They just lay down, close, not quite touching, but close enough to feel the echo of each other's breath. Elias stared at the ceiling, voice soft. What happens if you stay?
I abandon tradition, disrupt succession, face consequences that may follow me across star systems. What happens if you go? I sleep alone in a palace full of voices that do not know mine. He let the silence settle. Then, want to borrow my lucky socks for the coronation? They're mismatched. They have character. I don't need luck, she said. I need time. Then take it. The throne isn't going anywhere. When the lights dimmed, she didn't take the cot. She lay beside him on the bunk, one arm draped loosely across his chest, the other curled beneath her chin. Her armor sat in the corner, dormant. Her crown stayed in its case, and for the first time, her ears rested completely still. Elias woke to a faint vibration under his ribs, the gentle purr of the atmospheric regulator syncing with the base's rotation. Taylor was still asleep, one arm loosely wrapped around his middle, her breathing a steady rhythm against his side. For a long moment, he didn't move. Not because he was afraid of waking her, but because he knew the moment he sat up, the world would come knocking. The world arrived in the form of Silex, chiming through the wall speaker with what could only be described as smug panic. Priority transmission from Valari High Command. Code Violet. Interstellar urgency. Also, good morning. Taylor didn't stir. Elias reached over and tapped the console. The hollow display flickered to life, revealing the face of a Valari counselor who looked like he'd swallowed a cactus made of regulations. Queen Vire, the counselor began, eyes flicking past Elias with visible disapproval. Your continued absence now qualifies as a constitutional irregularity. The coronation summit begins in 3 rotations. If you do not arrive, the crown will be transferred to secondary air protocol. Elias rubbed his face. Do you people have a setting between urgent and existential crisis? The counselor ignored him. The throne will not wait. Make your decision. The feed cut. Elias looked over. Taylor's eyes were open, calm, focused. She'd heard every word. You okay? He asked. She sat up slowly. But I've never made a decision like this while feeling okay. Later that morning, they walked through the docking bay in silence. Taylor's travel armor shimmered with the formal regalia of her station. Her crown, small, sharp, and faintly humming, rested on her temple like a whisper of inevitability. Elias walked beside her, hands in his pockets, trying not to look like the guy who once clogged a base toilet with dehydrated lasagna. I always thought I'd go back, she said finally. Do what was expected. Be who they trained me to be. You still can. She turned to him, expression unreadable. Do you want me to? He shrugged. I want you to want to stay, but I'm not about to tell a space monarch how to live her life. You once told me my ceremonial cloak looked like a disgruntled curtain. I stand by that. They reached her ship, sleek, silver, unmistakably royal, the kind of vessel that flew as much with presence as with propulsion. I need to see it through, she said. Go back. Stand in front of them. Let them see who I am now. Elias nodded slowly. So this is goodbye? No, she said. This is intermission. She kissed him. No preamble, no drama. Just her lips on his, her hand at the back of his neck, her crown nearly knocking into his forehead. It was awkward and perfect. She stepped onto the ship. The door sealed. The engines hummed, then roared. She was gone. 3 rotations passed. Elias returned to his routine. Patrols, half-broken equipment, debating moral philosophy with vending machines that now only dispense chalky wafers and unsolicited wisdom. He didn't talk about her. Not much. Just enough to confuse the cafeteria cook, who started making meals shaped like Valari star glyphs out of boredom and mild sympathy. On the fourth rotation, the base received a broadcast. A coronation. Not hers. The secondary heir had taken the crown. Taylor had abdicated. She wasn't on the ship that landed. Not at first. The first person to disembark was a Villari liaison, holding a signed declaration of renunciation, legally binding, diplomatically treasonous, and delivered with the stiff poise of someone who was trying very hard not to hyperventilate. Then she stepped out. No crown, no armor, just a tunic, a small bag, and the faintest trace of a smile. Elias was waiting on the landing deck, leaning against a cargo crate with a mug of coffee and a terrible haircut he claimed was intentional. "You missed the ceremony," he said. "I caught the highlights," she replied. "There were fireworks. Someone fell off a balcony." He handed her the coffee. "I saved your toothbrush." "Mine or yours?" "They fuse. Silic says it's symbolic." They walked back to their room together. No fanfare, no speeches. Just a soft click of the door, 2 cups of bad caffeine, and the quiet sense of something finally aligned. Taylor unpacked slowly. Not her royal gear, just clothes that didn't hum, books written in languages that didn't demand titles, a plant that glowed faintly when it felt safe. That night, she didn't go to the cot. She didn't need an invitation. She curled up beside him, long ears twitching with something like peace. Elias looked at the ceiling. "I think we're going to be weird roommates forever." She rested her head on his shoulder. "Speak for yourself. I plan to be weird and sovereign. Queen of the sock drawer. Only if you swear fealty." He reached for her hand. "I already did." The base turned quietly beneath them. Outside, stars burned in lazy spirals. Inside, 2 lives, no longer bound by protocol or mission, chose to stay. And this time, they didn't need danger to do it.